because of your interest in this book that you would probably be interested in the current traveling exhibit that we have installed at the Jewish History Center. It's entitled The True Wartime Escape, Margaret and H.A. Ray's Journey from France. This exhibit tells the story of the authors of Curious George, who were Jews living in Paris at the time of the Nazi invasion. They had quite the escape story and even managed to carry out the original Curious George manuscript in their bicycle basket. So definitely come check that out. It is open through December 19th. We also have several other events and some small workshops that will be socially distant coming up, including 2 wreath workshops right after Thanksgiving. And we have another virtual book chat coming up with author William Buckheit, who wrote The South Carolina State Hospital, Stories from Bull Street. That will be on November 12th. Same format as this event. Registration is open, so I'll include that link in the chat box as well. And back to tonight's event. While unfortunately you won't be able to get an autographed book in person, our wonderful local Sumter Books a Million has received signed book plates, kindly from the author, where you can get those when you order directly through their Sumter store. So to do this, go to booksamillion.com and order the book for pickup at the Sumter store. You can also call them or visit the store at the Sumter Mall. We'll have that information for you in the chat box and again at the end of the event. We're going to have time at the end for Q&A. So if you are in the Zoom webinar, please feel free to type in any questions that you have for the author in the chat box during the program, and we will get to as many as we can. I want to thank our Education and Visitor Services Manager, Amanda Cox, and volunteer Trevor Bachnight for handling the tech aspects of tonight's event. Amanda's also going to help moderate the event and handle the questions at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the author, and then I will let her take over. Kristin Harmel is the New York Times bestselling and #1 international bestselling author of The Book of Lost Names, The Winemaker's Wife, and a dozen other novels that have been translated into numerous languages and sold all over the world. A former reporter for People magazine, Kristin has been writing professionally since the age of 16, when she began her career as a sports writer, covering Major League Baseball and NHL hockey for a local magazine in Tampa Bay, Florida. After stints covering health and lifestyle for American Baby, Men's Health, and Women's Day, she became a reporter for People magazine while still in college and spent more than a decade working for the publication, covering everything from the Super Bowl to high-profile murders to celebrity interviews with the likes of Ben Affleck, Matthew McConaughey, Outkast, Justin Timberlake, and Patrick Dempsey. Her favorite stories at People, however, were The Heroes Among Us features, tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. One of those features, the story of Holocaust survivor turned philanthropist Henry Landworth, partially inspired her 2012 novel, The Sweetness of Forgetting. In addition to a long magazine writing career, she was a frequent contributor to the national television morning show, The Daily Buzz, where her assignments including flying to London 3 times to interview the cast of the Harry Potter films. She was born just outside of Boston and spent her childhood there, as well as in Columbus, Ohio, and St. Petersburg, Florida. After graduating with a degree in journalism from the University of Florida, she spent time living in Paris and Los Angeles and now lives in Orlando with her husband and young son, along with some other Sumter County Museum favorite authors like Mary Alice Monroe and Christy Woodson Harvey. Harmel is also the co-founder and co-host of the weekly web show and podcast, Friends in Fiction. So make sure to check that out on her Facebook page. Ooh, what a bio. We are very honored to host you tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Hi. Hey, Annie, thank you. Can you all see me? I'm only seeing my thing at the top of the screen. Hopefully, let's see. Amanda, am I visible? I'm good. All righty, cool. Thank you. Cool. That's so weird. I must be getting like a really clearly it's on my side of Zoom. I apologize. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I am so happy to be here tonight. And that was actually the perfect introduction for this, because part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is the story of Henry Landworth, who was the Holocaust survivor that Annie mentioned in that wonderful introduction. So this is great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much to the Sumter County Museum and the Temple Sinai Jewish History Center. I totally want to come and see that exhibit. I'm so disappointed that it's only going to be through December. That's crazy. I probably will not make it up there between now and then, but it sounds fascinating. So I hope you do go check it out if you're in the area. It sounds really fascinating, and it sounds like a good companion to the Book of Lost Names. So like Annie said, and I'll just tell you, I'm just going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes. I'm going to do a short little reading from the book, and then I'm completely happy to take your questions. I always feel like these events go better when it's interactive, when we get to kind of chat with each other, and I get to answer the things you really want to know. So as Annie said, I was a contributor to People magazine, where I covered everything from the Super Bowl 3 times to the murder of a sheriff-elect, to the NBA All-Star Game and the MTV Movie Awards, to stories of police corruption and celebrity interviews with the people that Annie mentioned. But in addition to the people she mentioned, 2 of the ones that really stood out in my mind were Walter Cronkite and John Glenn. And it's those last 2 actually who tied directly into me writing about the Second World War. So you see, my favorite stories at People were the ones we called the Heroes Among Us stories, which were the tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to make the world a better place. So if you've read any of my work so far, that probably sounds familiar to you. It kind of tends to be a recurring theme in my novels. This idea that we all have the capacity to be extraordinary, especially in times of darkness. So over the years, I've had the opportunity to interview many amazing people. But my favorite among all those stories, as Annie said, was the story of Henry Landworth, a Florida man who founded a chain of hotels in the 1960s with 2 good friends, who became a millionaire because of those investments, and who, in 1986, decided to donate most of his fortune to the founding of Give Kids the World, an organization that provides magical vacations to children with critical illnesses and their families. So you might be wondering what that has to do with World War II or with Walter Cronkite and John Glenn. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Henry Landworth. So Henry and his twin sister Margot were born on March 7th, 1927 in Antwerp, Belgium. Their family was Jewish, and Henry was 13, just 13, when he and his twin sister, when he and Margot were separated from their parents, Max and Fanny, and sent east to Nazi concentration camps. So Henry spent the years between the ages of 13 to 18, so 5 incredibly formative years of his childhood, in several concentration camps, including the infamous Auschwitz. And at the end of the war, though he and Margot remarkably survived, both of their parents were killed. So on his own, with just $20 in his pocket, he climbed aboard a freight ship and made his way to the United States, where he was soon drafted into the Army. Later, he used his GI benefits from the Army to learn about hotel management, and he wound up working his way up from being a junior bellman to a front desk manager in New York. In the 50s, he moved to Florida, which is where I live now, to manage the 100-room Starlight Motel in Cocoa Beach near Cape Canaveral, which just so happened to be the hotel that the Mercury 7 astronauts and the journalists who were covering their historic mission would soon make home. It was during this time that Henry became very good friends with both astronaut John Glenn and television journalist Walter Cronkite, and those wound up being friendships that lasted a lifetime. In fact, in separate interviews for People magazine, both Glenn and Cronkite told me that Henry Landworth was one of the most amazing people they'd ever met. And when you think about all the people that those men must have met over the years, all the lives that intersected with theirs, I think that's saying quite a lot. I was very impressed to hear that from both of them. So in any case, the 3 men went into business together years later to invest in some hotels, leaning heavily on Henry's expertise in the hotel field. That is how they made their millions, and that's how Henry, by the mid-1980s, was in the position to found Give Kids the World. But why found an organization to help terminally ill children? What did that have to do with the horrible things that had happened to him during the Second World War? Well, one of the things that stuck with me after our interview was the simplicity behind his motivation. This is my therapy, he told me. I see myself in those children's faces. I did not have control over my life at all, and they don't have any over theirs either. I was so moved by that, and his words really stayed with me for years after the fact, too. But you know what stuck kind of in my head and my heart more than anything? It was one other small thing he said in passing during our interview. In order to survive in the concentration camps, I had to learn to turn my feelings off, he said. And when it was all over, I didn't know how to turn them back on again. He said that the only time he felt anything at all was when he was at the Give Kids the World Village, spending time with these children he identified with so very much. And though I think his life was probably quite happy in the end, I think there was always just this tremendous sadness there too. I mean, think about that. He had his childhood stolen from him, but not just his childhood. When the Nazis came and put him in a concentration camp, when they killed his parents, they took away his ability to open his heart and to feel the things we all feel throughout life, basic emotions we take for granted. That thought, that just, oh, it just took my breath away. So I had the chance to speak once more with Henry after the publication of my 2012 novel, The Sweetness of Forgetting, which was my first novel featuring World War II. So in it, one of the main characters is a woman named Rose, who survives the Holocaust in France with the help of, interestingly enough, the Muslims of the Grand Mosque of Paris, which is actually based on a true story. But it's just a fascinating true story, actually. I could go on and on about that, about the Grand Mosque of Paris, obviously run by Muslims, saved over 1,000 Jewish people during the war, which is just so cool. But anyways, and I think it's something that really kind of resonates in our world today too. But anyhow, in The Sweetness of Forgetting, years later, Rose, the grandmother and the character from the past, has dementia, and no one knows her real story. So she locked it away years ago just to survive, much like Henry Landworth did. And she never knew how to unlock that box, to feel the things she was supposed to feel, until her dementia set in. Her character, her specific psychological reaction to the war and her experiences in it, was based loosely on those words of Henry Landworth, which had stayed with me for all those years. They're still with me. I was able to tell him that toward the end, but like Rose, his memory was fading by then. He passed away in April of 2018 at the age of 91, but the mark he left, not just in Give Kids the World, but in several other charities too, is indelible. You've got to give of yourself, he told me. Not money, but the essence of yourself. That is what makes life meaningful. Indeed, that's a lesson my characters learn too, in many of my novels, but especially in the Book of Lost Names, the one that we're here to talk about tonight. So the Book of Lost Names is the story of a female forger in World War II who stumbles into the French resistance mostly by accident and winds up helping save the lives of hundreds of children. So she's a graduate student working at the Sorbonne Library in Paris when her father, a Polish-born Jew, is arrested. She and her mother are also on a list for deportation, and so they flee using documents that she has quickly falsified herself, despite having very little or no experience in this. So they wind up in a small French mountain town in the unoccupied zone, where a priest working for the local resistance network finds out about her false papers, approaches her and offers her help in getting her father out of the detention center for Jews where he's being held just outside of Paris. She reluctantly agrees, basically with the motive of wanting to save her father. But soon she meets Remy, an accomplished forger who's a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. He's a little bit reluctant to take her on. He kind of has a little ego about his skill at forgery. And it's very soon that he realizes that she's actually better at these forgeries than he is. So she becomes passionate not just about saving the children, and really the majority of the documents they're forging, especially toward the beginning, are for escaping children. But she also becomes passionate about preserving their real identities, especially those who are too young to remember who they really are once their names have been changed. So they decide to encode those identities in a 1732 religious text, which they start referring to as the Book of Lost Names, hence the title of the novel. But toward the end of the war, after their resistance cell is blown and Remy disappears, the book goes missing too, possibly looted by the Nazis as they pull out of France. And 60 years later, we meet Ava again. She's a librarian working in Winter Park, Florida, and she happens to glimpse the book in an article in the New York Times about Nazi looted books and the search to return them to their rightful owners. So as the story unfolds in the past, we also see Ava in the present trying to summon her courage to go to Berlin, kind of the heartland of her old enemy, right? To finally uncover the last secret held within the pages of the Book of Lost Names. So I'm going to read to you just the first page and a half. It takes about a minute and a half, so don't worry, it's not a long reading. But it'll just give you a very quick little taste of the Book of Lost Names. So chapter 1, May 2005. It's a Saturday morning and I'm midway through my shift at the Winter Park Public Library when I see it. The book I last laid eyes on more than 6 decades ago. The book I believed had vanished forever. The book that meant everything to me. It's staring out at me from a photograph in the New York Times, which someone has left open on the returns desk. The world goes silent as I reach for the newspaper, my hand trembling nearly as much as it did the last time I held the book. It can't be, I whisper. I gaze at the picture. A man in his 70s looks back at me, his snowy hair sparse and wispy, his eyes frog-like behind bulbous glasses. 60 years after end of World War II, German librarian seeks to reunite looted books with rightful owners, declares the headline. And I want to cry out to the man in the image that I am the rightful owner of the book he's holding. The faded, leather-bound volume with the peeling bottom right corner and the gilded spine. It belongs to me and to Remy, a man who died long ago. A man I vowed after the war to think of no more. But he's been in my thoughts this week anyhow, despite my best efforts. Tomorrow, the 8th of May, the world will celebrate the 60th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. It's impossible, with all the young newscasters speaking solemnly of the war, as if they could conceivably understand it, not to think of Remy, not to think of the time we spent together then, not to think of the people we saved and the way it all ended. Though my son tells me I'm blessed to have such a sharp mind in my old age, like many blessings, this one is mixed. Most days, I just long to forget. So that leads me pretty naturally into talking quickly about something else that I kind of like to share when I do these virtual events. And that is the real documents I used in the research for this book. So I began, of course, by doing a lot of research into kind of the hows of forgery, how it was done, how the forgery cells operated, how forgers often found their way into the movement and learned their craft, how documents were erased, how documents were created, things like that. It was fascinating, and you'll find the results of that research within the pages of the book. I really, when I'm writing a book like this, I really try to make the world as round and colorful and realistic as I can. So I did put a lot of those details in the book because I wanted you to know them too. They were just such cool details. But I wanted to show you a couple of things I used in my research. So one was a Nazi-issued travel permit that was actually granted on the 2nd of December, 1940 in Paris. So this is it. And you can see, so one of the reasons this was so helpful was, I did a ton of reading about forged documents and how it was so difficult to forge. And one of the things that they kept talking about in every book was how it was difficult to duplicate the paper until they started receiving paper drops from the Allies, right? And I was like, okay, well, but what kind of paper? I don't understand why it would be so difficult to get. Having this helped me kind of wrap my head around it. So you can also see some of the other things that would have been really difficult to duplicate. Like, for example, this stamp, right? Like, this was something that forgers would have had to find a way to do and to duplicate exactly. And that's described in the book. And it's just kind of interesting to hold this in my hands and realize this is something that somebody actually used in December of 1940 to travel freely around France. You would have needed one of these to travel freely around the country. There were German checkpoints everywhere. You needed to show this document a lot. And so it was one of the primary documents that a forger would have made for you. Another thing I wanted to show you is something called the Journal Officiel. So this one is from August of 1944. I actually have several of them from the summer of 1944. So these are the real Journals Officiels. And basically what it is an official government document of France. So it recorded everything from divorces, naturalizations, land transfers. Basically everything legal that went through the government was recorded here to make it part of public record. This came out 5 days a week. And it became a prime source for document forgers to steal identities, because you couldn't just say, this is Anne Smith from Paris, and she's 25 and don't you believe us? You had to actually have an identity that matched up with a real person, and the details had to match too. If you had a thick Polish accent, for example, you would have to have the identity of someone who had a paper trail showing that they were naturalized, a naturalized citizen who had come from somewhere in Eastern Europe or in Russia, for example. So this became an invaluable resource to steal false identities for people, but false identities that had a paper trail in case they were ever caught. So that was another kind of cool thing. And then finally, I mentioned to you the Book of Lost Names, the 1732 religious text that they use within the novel to encode the names of the children whose names they're changing. Well, the code itself was fiction, but the book is real. So in order to write this book, I actually used a real 1732 religious text. This is exactly the one I describe in the book. And every single time I referenced something specific about the code, like if I said she put a dot over the E and on page 3 and a triangle over the I or whatever, I was doing it actually on the pages of this book. I was not marking up the pages of this book because it is really a 1732 religious text from France, which I think is just so cool to have and hold in my hands. But I would look at the page and I would say like, okay, this is where this is going to go. And but I use this. So and every day while I was writing the book, I put a hand on this, and it was kind of my little connection to the past. I mean, think about this. This book existed before our country did. Isn't that an interesting thought? So, and before the French Revolution, which is kind of a cool thought too. So I also wanted to show you one more thing about this. The person who designed the cover of the Book of Lost Names never saw this book. She didn't know it existed. But look, don't you think that looks really similar? Like the book she came up with, this one did have gilding on the front. It's just worn off over the years. And look at the spine. Isn't that so cool? She did this beautiful spine that I think matches almost exactly to this. It was like she was in my head. So anyhow, those are kind of some of the cool little show and tell things that I kind of look at as one of the benefits of being able to show you during a virtual event, because those things would be kind of, to me at least, a little too valuable to be bringing on the road. So although I would love to be there in person in Sumter County, at least I'm getting to show you some of the cool behind the scenes research materials. So thank you so much to all of you who've picked up the book already or are thinking about picking it up, especially from Books A Million. And I'm so happy they got the signed book plates. And, I'm always such a big believer in supporting the local stores that support the local community. And I know that Books A Million does that there in Sumter County. So I do hope that if you read the book or have read it, I hope you'll feel inspired by it. I hope you'll remember, especially now during these strange, weird times in our country's history, in our world's history, that it's often in the darkness that we find the brightest light within us. Much like Henry Landworth, and much like Ava in the Book of Lost Names, we all have the power to change our own corners of the world for the better. We all have the capacity to be heroes in our families, in our work lives, in our communities. And we all have the power to rise up and meet the extraordinary challenges we're facing now, and to use that strength within us to make the world a better place. So I would encourage you to go out there and be a hero, like Ava and the real forgers who came before her. Be you and find your own extraordinary. Thank you again for having me. And now I would love to take your questions. I love questions.
All right. Let's see. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if I am visible. Let me take a
Yep.
look.
I see you. I'm not sure if you are. I don't know. I see you.
Okay. So thank you so much, Kristin. You're delightful.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I really like the show and tell.
Thanks.
That was really cool. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Cox, and I work here at the Sumner County Museum, which also, of course, includes Sinai Jewish History Center. And so obviously we have that connection, and I've read about half of the book. I woke up this morning at 6 a.m. and was reading it. Yeah.
Well, no spoilers. I won't give away the ending.
I won't. But we do have some questions for you. And I'm going to go from the top here. Let's see. That was a question about our H.A. Ray exhibit.
Oh, cool. I know. I totally want to come up and see it. I'm so upset that it's going to go away in December.
It's so good. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, it sounds fascinating.
All right. Let's see. Well, Susan Seligman, she has a comment.
Hey, Susan. Okay.
Book of Lost Names is one of the best books of 2020.
Aw, thank you,
Susan. And she hated for it to end.
Aw. Well, thank you so much, Susan. I hope, and she would also like to see the H.A. Ray exhibit. So there you go. Yes. But thank you, Susan. Well, rest assured, I'm working hard on the next one. So hopefully it won't be out till July, but I mean, there'll be another story. So, but thank you, Susan. I really, really appreciate that. That's a kind thing to say.
And I'm actually, just for everybody that's participating right now, just to let you guys know, I'm looking at the chat and I'm also looking at the Q&A. So just to let you guys know, and I'll get around to all the questions. So this is from Marlene W. Kristin, has there been a discovery in your World War II research that has been exceptionally surprising or shocking?
That is a great question. Well, the one I mentioned in my, my earbuds are falling out. The one I mentioned in my talk, it was not for this book, but the one I mentioned in my talk about the sweetness of forgetting, when I set out to write The Sweetness of Forgetting, which was my 2012 novel that concerned World War II a little bit, I was just setting out to write a novel about a woman in Paris and bakeries. It centers around this tradition of bakeries that goes between the past and the present, and it turns out there are some secrets kind of baked into these family recipes. But when I first started researching that book, I had no idea that Muslims and Christians had worked together in Paris to save over 1,000 Jews. I thought that was fascinating. And there were things like the Grand Mosque of Paris. They had a Muslim cemetery, and they would create false gravestones for that were supposedly like Muslim family members of these people who in real life were Jewish, so that if the authorities came and said, well, we know this person's Jewish, they would say, oh no, absolutely not, they're Muslim. Like, they were putting gravestones in their cemetery, which I thought was so interesting, and they were smuggling them out. And I loved that. And along those lines, I came across, I know I should be talking about the Book of Lost Names, but gosh, the research into that was so interesting. I also came across these awesome stories about, of all places, Albania, which has a tradition called Besa, which, so Albania is also a heavily Muslim country. And it was sort of rooted in the Muslim tradition. And Besa meant that if somebody comes to your door and asks you for something, you were obligated to help them. And because of that, they gave shelter to thousands and thousands of Jewish people, most of them coming from Germany toward the beginning of the war, throughout the entire war. And I never had heard that story. I thought that was neat. And then also in my 2016 16 novel, I think it was 15 or 16. It was called When We Meet Again. And that's all about German POWs in the United States. And I never knew before I started researching that there had been 400,000 German POWs living and working in the United States during World War II, and that many of them stayed after the war. So I just love going down these research rabbit holes that are like, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired to write about this. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that's so exciting about writing about World War II. You kind of never know what you're going to find, but they're all stories that are incredible and interesting and have relevance in today's world, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think that maybe you already just answered that question, but, and I'm hoping I'm getting everyone's names right. Mary Kenstra. What inspired you to research and write about World War II?
So that is a great question. So that's not where my career began, or my novel writing career. I used to write chick lit. I wrote my first book when I was like 24. It came out when I was 26. And I was in my 20s. I was single. I had no idea what I was doing. I liked shoes. I was basically Carrie Bradshaw, or a wannabe Carrie Bradshaw. And so writing that kind of book, chick lit, really made sense at the time. But I think my heart was always in World War II. The Diary of Anne Frank had touched me so much. I read it, I think, probably when I was around 11. And it was when my parents were going through a divorce, and it resonated so much with me and kind of really helped me through that period of my life. But it was also the first time I realized that books could make a difference, like books could change the world. And I had never grasped that before. I had always wanted to be a writer, but I thought, well, maybe that's not a very responsible career choice. Like, I'm just entertaining people. I want to do something important with my life. And that was the book that made me realize that you could do both at once. You could move people, and that is a way of changing the world. Move people, educate people, open people's minds to things they didn't know before. So the Diary of Anne Frank really stayed with me. And then after talking to Henry Landworth, I think that was all kind of reawakened within me. And then I lived in Paris in my early 20s. And it wasn't until I lived in Paris that I truly understood that so much Holocaust history had happened there. I mean, I knew World War II obviously had taken place in France, partially. But I had never realized that so many Jewish people there had been deported. Because when I thought about that, I mostly thought of Eastern Europe, when I was younger and before I knew that much about it. And realizing I was living literally on the same streets where things had happened, people had been taken away, never to return. Being there in the midst of that, I think just really drove something home for me. And I think when I came back from that, I knew that I had to write a World War II story set in France one day. And then I started and couldn't stop, and that's the thing, like every World War II book I write, there's something I discover along the way that may not even be that connected to that initial book, but like there's always something that's like, ooh, that would make an interesting novel. And I mean, I know I'm going to have to stop at some point. Like at some point you all are going to be so sick of reading about World War II and really sick of reading about World War II written by me. But like right now I'm just so into it. And I love the research, and I love being able to bring worlds alive based on that research.
Well, there are so many stories to tell too.
Yeah, there are. There's so many stories we don't know yet. Yeah.
So let me see if I can keep up with the questions. I'm going to switch over to Q&A because Anissa has been waiting for a little while.
Oh, hey, Anissa, I love her.
She asks, what was the most interesting piece of information that you uncovered while researching for the Book of Lost Names? And you may have sort of already answered.
Yeah, good question, Anissa. Specifically for the Book of Lost Names, it was probably, to me, probably the most interesting stuff was the stuff about the actual forgery techniques. And I know I've mentioned this in other chats, but like one of the things that really stood out to me was there was a forger in Paris named Adolfo Kaminsky, who the character of Ava is based a little bit on. She's actually based on a few people kind of rolled together, but one of them is Adolfo Kaminsky. And Adolfo Kaminsky, when he was a younger man, and he was still a young man when the war started, I think he was 19 when he began forging documents for the resistance. But when he was maybe like, I don't know, 13 or 14, he was living in more rural France, and he worked at a dairy conglomerate, and he worked as an apprentice under the chemist for the dairy conglomerate. And their method of figuring out whether cream had been diluted and watered down was to dissolve Waterman's blue ink in it, because the chemical compound in Waterman's blue ink was erased by lactic acid. And so if the cream was undiluted, it would be erased more quickly. So that was just a random thing that they did in the countryside of France. When he started forging, he realized that lactic acid was therefore the only thing that would erase Waterman's blue ink, which was the primary ink used at that time on some of the documents that needed to be quickly erased and then reworked. Because at the beginning, toward the beginning, before they got good at forging documents, a lot of forgery bureaus deleted things that were already on documents and filled them back in. But the Germans had already gotten wise to that, and they were putting stuff in Waterman's blue ink, which was supposed to be indelible, except Adolfo Kaminsky figured out, in fact, it was not indelible. You could erase it with lactic acid, which he only knew because he worked for a dairy farmer. So that was just fascinating to me. Like, what an interesting piece of knowledge, but what an interesting way to come about it. And he was like almost predestined for this life. He saved tens of thousands of people in Paris, which I think is awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a neat fact.
Catherine Bloomberg would like to know, how did you get the original documents that you have?
I wish I had a really cool answer for that, but eBay. Yeah, I mean, I knew the documents I was looking for, and they're really hard to find. Like, they're very specific and they're difficult to find. And if you think about it, like, these aren't the things that are going to stick around for the next, like, if someone 75 years from now is looking for a Florida driver's license from 2020, I have one now, and they're plentiful now. You could find them everywhere now, but 75 years from now, we're not all going to have hung on to our driver's licenses to preserve them for the future. And then think about it. These were all things that were just on like paper that deteriorates, right? So difficult to find. It took me several months, but I did find some reputable dealers in France who deal in like World War II era memorabilia and had physical storefronts and like real reviews and everything. So I felt comfortable that they were authentic things. But yeah, so eBay.
All right, well, that's really interesting. Let's see. Okay, well, the next question is answered because Susan was asking, where did you get all the artifacts that you showed us?
eBay. Sorry. Super boring.
Now, Tracy, our lovely, wonderful, every time anybody watches or comes to a book signing at the museum or virtual book chat, we have our wonderful Tracy Miller, who is the manager at Books A Million, and we love.
Oh, hey, Tracy. Oh, Tracy, I hope I get to meet you in person someday. I will. I'll be there. I'll be there within the year for sure.
All the other people that you named earlier when we were talking before the video started, Tracy has introduced me. I've met all of them since I started working here, but Tracy's wonderful, and she is runs our local Books A Million here in Sumter. So she would like to know, what is your next book?
Ooh, my next book is called The Forest of Vanishing Stars. I just saw the cover mock-up today, which you're going to be revealing in a couple weeks. I'm so excited. It turned out so pretty. We went through kind of a couple versions where like the girl wasn't quite right and whatever, but I'm so excited. It's going to be awesome. But so The Forest of Vanishing Stars, it'll be out July 13th. And I have, after writing several books set in France, I had this idea to write something set farther to the east. And I've always been really interested in the story of the Bielski Brothers. I don't know if you know it, but there was a group in the forests of, it was Poland at the time, but it's in Belarus now, it was these brothers. Their parents were killed. They had some siblings who had moved to America, other siblings that were murdered. But four of them escaped into the forest. It was Tuvia, Azael, Zeus, and Aaron Bielski, the four of them. And they set up a society there, and by which 1,200 Jewish people who were marked for execution hid in the forest and survived. It's incredible. So they were the largest group like that. There were others, like there was a group called the Zoran group, and there were a lot of smaller family groups, although people had better chances of survival when they were in larger groups. But the book I'm writing is kind of a fictionalized version of that. It's not the real Bielski group. It's a much smaller group. But it's about a group of people who survive in the forests of Poland, led by this woman who was raised in the forest. So the way that I pitched it was Where the Crawdads Sing meets Defiance meets Rapunzel, because this woman was kidnapped from her German parents and raised in complete isolation in the forest and has no idea what's going on in the outside world. I mean, she's like deep in the forest until she stumbles upon some fleeing Jewish refugees in 1942. And so her life kind of intertwines with theirs, and they sort of save each other. So it's actually due in a week and a half. So I'm like if you're wondering why I'm like blah, 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 it's because I'm working on like no sleep and all caffeine right now, trying to get this book done, but I'm really excited about it. The research has been fascinating. And one of the Bielski brothers is actually still alive, the youngest, he's 93. And I got the opportunity to talk to him. And so to talk to someone who went through that and survived that and like was partially responsible for saving 1,200 people, just amazing. I'm so inspired.
Yeah. Wow. Helen Kapner would like to know, kind of jumping around here, but was the code that you talked about, was that based on a real code?
So the code in the book was fictional, but it was based on something called the Fibonacci sequence, which is a real mathematical sequence. And it's a mathematical sequence I was obsessed with when I was a kid. Like when I was like, I don't know, like 7 or 8 or 9. I had this, what's that?
It's everywhere.
Yeah, but I was like such a math nerd, and I had this dream that I was going to be like the first kid who could solve unsolvable math problems, and I was just going to be famous for that. So I used to lie in bed at night and run the numbers of the Fibonacci sequence in my head as like mental exercise to prepare me for like my great math world domination, which as you can see, that didn't really work out very well. But when I was writing the Book of Lost Names, I knew I needed to have a code at the center of this book, and I had no idea what I was going to use. I spent a month researching, codes that like British coders for like actually for Britain used, or like what codes were used during World War II. Like I did just a deep dive into codes, like World War II codes, and then one day just the light bulb went on, and I was like, wait a minute. The Fibonacci sequence, like all those nights when you were 7 weren't a waste after all. And it fit perfectly. So it's a code that is based on the Fibonacci sequence in terms of the page numbers. And it actually totally works. If I ever need to encode anything, well, except now that I've told you all, now you'd break the code. But if I ever need to encode anything that's not in Sumter, South Carolina, I'm going to use that.
This is great. Let's see. Oh, Tracy has another good question, and this is for you and your friends. If people don't know about Friends in Fiction.
Oh, okay.
Tracy said that she's so excited to see you on Friends in Fiction, and can you tell us how you ended up joining the group?
Yeah, Tracy, thank you so much for asking. So Friends in Fiction, and for those of you who don't know, Friends in Fiction is a Wednesday, well, it's a Facebook group that we just actually hit 21,000 members today, which is awesome. We started it in April, so we just celebrated our 6-month anniversary last week. So to get to 21,000 in 6 months, we're like, what is happening? This is amazing. But this came out of, so it's a Facebook group where people come and talk about reading and the books they're reading and writing and all that kind of stuff. But we also, kind of the centerpiece of it is we have I see Susie Waldwin never misses Friends in Fiction. Thank you. The centerpiece of it is it's a Wednesday night, 7 p.m. Eastern chat featuring the 5 Friends in Fiction authors, which are me, Mary Alice Monroe, Mary Kay Andrews, Christy Woodson Harvey, and Patty Callahan Henry. So there are 5 of us. And now we have guests most weeks too. So we started it at the beginning of April, I think it was like April 3rd or 4th, the 5 of us plus Christina McMorris, another author, got together for just a casual Zoom. We all had books, except for Christina, we all had books that were coming out in the spring or the summer. We all had completely canceled book tours, and we were concerned about reaching our readers, but we were also really concerned about independent booksellers, who, often have, my thing's falling out again, often have really like razor thin profit margins in the best of times, and who were in many cases having to close their doors for an indefinite period of time, who were losing all these author events. We were really worried about what was happening to them. So we had this idea, and we said, well, what if we took our conversation, like we're just having wine and talking about books here, what if we took that live and did it somehow to benefit independent booksellers? So we thought, like, okay, maybe a couple hundred people will show up. It'll be awesome. We'll be happy we did it. We'll do it through the end of May, because obviously the world's going to be normal again by May. And we had our first episode April 15th. And by the end of May, the world was not normal again, but we were having so much fun. And we were like, let's keep going, but let's invite other people to be part of the fun. So our first guest on June 3rd was Kristin Harmel. And we have had just awesome people. I mean, we had Delia Owens, who wrote Where the Crawdads Sing. We had Debbie McCumber, who I always thought you said her name Maycomer, but it's McCumber, which I know because she told us herself. So like now I feel like I feel comfortable in saying that, McCumber. We had Emily Giffen, we've had Jasmine Guillory, we just had so many interesting people. We had Charlene Harris last week, who wrote the True Blood series, which was so cool. And we have Elizabeth Berg coming up tomorrow night. So it's great. We have Sue Monk Kidd coming. We have Britt Bennett coming in a couple weeks. It's just unbelievable. We're booked now all the way through June. And I don't see us stopping anytime soon. It's fun. So if you...
Great.
Thank you. So if anyone out there, if you haven't joined us already, I hope you'll give us a chance tomorrow night, Wednesday at 7. And even if you're not available Wednesdays at 7, the old videos are can't even talk, always still available on our Friends in Fiction Facebook page. And so just look for Friends in Fiction on Facebook. You'll find us.
Awesome. This is a neat question. Jennifer Hall would like to know, have you always wanted to be a writer? And I have read your bio, but of course I'll let you.
Well, I have always wanted to be a writer, except for that brief period where I was going to be like the child math star, right? My mom does tell me that when I was like, I think three or four, people would ask me what I wanted to be, and I would tell them I wanted to pump gas during the day because I liked how it smelled, and I wanted to play the piano in a bar at night because that sounded fun. So I mean, lost and shattered dreams, maybe one day. But aside from that, and aside from a brief period of wanting to be a pop star named Mystica, yes, I've always wanted to be a writer. And I started off as a journalist because it felt, well, I mean, I always wanted to go into journalism too, but writing novels was always kind of the end goal. But I think that the writing journalistic articles for a long time kind of made me better prepared to write novels. I think it helped me better capture dialogue and have a sense of how to tell a story in an efficient way.
All right, very interesting. Let's see. Okay, so, and I feel so bad because I don't know how to pronounce everyone's name. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to butcher these. Susan Seligman. Kristin, I think you should write about the life of Henry Landworth, who I know you mentioned earlier. And do you know what happened to his sister?
His sister Margot survived too. That is a great question. And she wound up in Florida too. And they wound up being best friends all through their lives, probably because they had survived something so terrible together. They had a joint experience that probably most of the other people in their lives could never fully understand. And in the end, when he had Alzheimer's, when he had dementia and was really kind of fading, even though they were the same age, and even though she was fairly old at that point too, fairly elderly at that point too, she was one of his caretakers. And she outlived him, I think she has passed away. But yeah, I know she outlived him, but I think she's gone now too. But they did get to be together for basically the rest of their lives. And it would be really neat to write his story, but I've done one real life story. I ghost wrote the autobiography of Chubby Checker, which was awesome. He's a South Carolina guy. He's from South Carolina. But I loved it. I loved the experience. But it's not the kind of writing I'm most comfortable with. So I would not have traded that one for anything in the world. Chubby's now one of my very best friends. The book hasn't even come out yet. But we've worked on it now for 10 years. I can't believe it's been that long. I've gone on tour with the Chubby Checker band, which is so cool. But so that was a fun experience. But yeah, I like lies. I like being able to make up fiction. That was one of the inconvenient things about being a journalist. Oh, you want me to tell the truth all the time?
Susan also had a comment, and she just said how much she loves the title, The Forest of Vanishing Stars.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
She said that she's excited to see the cover, and of course read the book.
Thank you. Well, we'll reveal it on Friends in Fiction. We just don't have a date yet. It'll probably be within the next couple of weeks. And the original title was The Dove of the Dark Forest, which is still how I'm thinking of it. But the publisher thought it sounded too much like a young adult fantasy book, which I totally understand. So it took me a long time to move on from that title. But I think I like The Forest of Vanishing Stars too. I think we settled on a good one.
All right, and then Karen Prouty would like to know, when did you live in Columbus, and what did you do while you were living there?
I lived there in the 80s, so I was age 2 to age 10, and so I did a lot of riding my bike and playing in the dirt, and I pretending I was Superman and trying to fly. Yeah, I lived in Worthington, Ohio, when I was a kid. And it was such a great place to live. I loved it. My dad worked at Columbus Children's Hospital, which I don't remember the name of it now, but it was the Children's Hospital in Columbus. I know it's a sponsored, maybe, I think it's Nationwide Children's Hospital now. But I was just back there right before the pandemic started, like just a couple months before, to do a signing at Gramercy Books in Bexley, which is a suburb of Columbus. And I got to spend a lot of time with my best friend, my childhood best friend's mother, who still lives there, which was really nice. And I get to go see my old house, my old school, and everything. So that was nice.
Yeah, that is. Vanessa Roberts has a question about the book. So in the book, she hasn't told her son about what she did during the war. So have you found in your research that a lot of the survivors don't tend to talk about what they went through?
Yeah, yes. And I think that kind of psychological reaction for me traces back to sort of what I was saying about Henry Landworth too. So, like Henry Landworth, as I mentioned, in order to survive, had to basically put his feelings in a box, and then he never knew how to unlock the box. I think for a lot of people who went through very traumatic things in the war, a lot of them never talked about it again. And particularly for people who blamed themselves, as Ava does in the book. Ava blames herself for some of the losses that happened, sort of in the course of her forgery work, and some of the losses of people she really loved. And in order to start over, I think her coping mechanism is just to lock it away and become someone new. But I think one of the things she has realized over the course of her life is you don't get to just decide that you didn't live this part of your life. Like you're you know what I mean? You're you, even if you want to pretend that you're not. And I think that's why I think, when I think about Ava, I think, I feel sorry for her. I mean, I know I made her up, which sounds like an insane thing to say. I'm like, oh, I feel sorry for this person I invented in my head. But, I think she was never herself with her husband, and she was never herself with her son, because to be herself would have been to release all of those things, those pieces of guilt and responsibility that she had stuffed deep down inside. And it's only sort of at the end of her journey that she realizes that was a mistake.
I'm going to read through some of these chats and kind of going back and forth, and let me make sure that I didn't miss anyone's questions. I can cover you with accolades.
Oh, that's sweet. Thanks for all the kind words, everyone. When I was talking, I saw some of the nice things come up, but I was like kind of trying to pay attention to what I was saying also. But thank you for all of you who said such nice things. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's see. Hope to meet you on a book tour next year.
Yeah.
And also, it must have been amazing to interview him.
Henry Landworth,
Yes,
or the
yes.
yes, yeah. It really was. Oh, he was such a neat man. Yeah.
See. Never miss Friends in Fiction. So awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. That's so nice.
See, I'm looking for one in particular. Someone also commented on how wonderful your newsletter is.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah. That's definitely got to be the Friends in Fiction newsletter, because I always forget to put one out. I get this whole email list, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna write a newsletter, and then I write like one newsletter the week my book comes out, and then I completely forget I have a newsletter. So yeah, but Friends in Fiction, we do it every week. So that's because someone else organizes it, not me. So.
Well, this is a comment, and I just, this is Susan again, and she shared a statement. So she said that her in-laws were survivors, and her husband said that they didn't share too much about their experiences until relatively late in life. Fortunately, they did share their lives with them and their kids before they passed away. And so
awesome.
This is why this genre is so important.
Yes.
Because there are not too many survivors left to share those stories.
Susan, you're totally right. And I remember you saying that before, Susan. That's so neat that you got to hear those stories at the end. And I think that's one of the reasons that World War II fiction is really kind of having a moment right now. I mean, I think there are a lot of reasons, but I think one of them is that all of us have a connection to that generation, whether it's a grandfather who went off to war, or a grandmother who was part of the war effort at home, or somebody like in Susan's case, in their family who actually were Holocaust survivors. I think regardless of what you were doing in that war or how you were connected to it, you suffered some trauma. I mean, unquestionably, the people in the concentration camps suffered obviously the most. But, I think even a lot of the soldiers who saw and did awful things probably came home and for the most part never talked about it again. I know my grandfather was actually just in the Merchant Marines, so he wasn't like on the front lines of battle or anything, but he never really talked about it. And he passed away 11 years ago, before I really had this interest in writing about World War II. And I always regret not asking him about his stories. I didn't know that I would want so badly to hear them, and that would be such a part of something I miss about him. And so I think it's a way to connect us to those people we love who might not be here anymore.
That is, that mirrors an experience that I had also. My grandfather, a lot, as so many of our grandfathers in our age group, fought in World War II, and he had books, but he never talked about it.
Yep.
And so I knew he was, obviously interested in it, but yeah, no, he never really talked about it.
That wasn't a generation that came home and went and saw a therapist and dealt with their PTSD. You know what I mean? Like that was a generation that just said, all right, I'm stuffing it down inside and I'm going to deal with it and just move on. You know what I mean? And so I think in doing so, a lot of them just never told those stories. Yeah.
Let me look. Let's see. We got one more. So Marlene just said this part of the discussion highlights why Holocaust, genocide, and bigotry education is so important.
It's totally true.
Let's see. Can you read the Q&As?
Yeah, I have the chat up. I just pulled the chat up. Do you want me to look at the Q&A also?
Well, if you just want to read some of the, if you want to read
and then unfortunately, I just looked at the clock. I've got to sign off in about 5 minutes because I've got another virtual event tonight at 7:30. Can you believe it? I'm like just back to back tonight.
Very popular. It's the #1 New York Times bestseller.
Oh, thank you. All right, so. All right, we got to Anissa's. How did you get the original documents? Let's see.
We're basically down at the bottom.
Yeah, I think you got most of these. Let me see.
I just wanted you to see Beverly's.
Oh, okay. Oh, Thank you. So Beverly said she wanted to say how much she enjoyed all my books. Thank you, Beverly. Especially The Sweetness of Forgetting and The Book of Lost Names. And you're now watching Friends in Fiction, and that's made your love of books grow even more. Thank you. The conversations between all of you are amazing, and the guest authors have been so interesting. Please keep this going even after this horrible pandemic ends. Thank you, Beverly Diamond. That's so nice. And yeah, we are absolutely planning on keeping it going. You know, when we initially thought we would end it at the end of May, we had no idea. But Beverly, I'm not kidding when I say I talked to the other 4. We just have a text chain. There's probably 50 texts back and forth between the 5 of us every single day. Like, I know them better than I know anybody else in my life right now, basically. We've just found this magical thing, and we're so happy that we're able to share it, and share it with all of you, and you know, have you be a part of it too. So thank you.
Well, this has been delightful, and you know, I had all of these questions written down, and I will tell you, everyone that participated was pretty thorough.
That's awesome. That was great.
I have one. I know you got to go. I have one question for you.
Okay.
What do you hope that your readers take away from this book?
That's a great question, and I think it's just the idea that that you don't need a big platform to do extraordinary things in the world. You just need a little bit of courage and your own voice, and that could be something as small, you know, like I was saying, when I read The Diary of Anne Frank, it clicked that like that was a way to change the world, right? And like something as simple as a book could change the world. Well, so could something as simple as a kind comment, or you know, someone who forgets their wallet at the checkout line, you pay for their groceries, or you go through the drive-through and you pay for the person behind you, or you hold a door for somebody, or you give a compliment to a stranger. Like all these little things in a dark time like this are the big, like add up to the big things that change the world. And I think we all have the capacity to be world changers and to try to do the right thing in our lives and make the world a better place. And I think that's something that Ava finds in this book. And I think that sometimes, like I said when in my little talk, like I do think that sometimes it's in the times of the greatest darkness that we find the greatest light within us. So that's kind of what I hope you take away.
Kristen, that was wonderfully said.
Thanks. I feel like I just babbled my way through it, but okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, and I hope
I
didn't miss anyone. If I did, I apologize profusely.
No, I think we got to most of it, but thank you all for the great questions. I really it's so nice to do a chat like, or you know, an event like this where everyone's so engaged and the questions are so great. So I really appreciate that, and I know we've gone a little long, and I appreciate you all hanging in and staying with us. It's really nice.
All right, well, Kristen, I'm gonna sign off, and I'm just gonna hang on for a second for those who are still watching, and just tell them remind them again about where they can get the book. And that's perfect. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to meet you in person.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Our book signings are a lot of fun.
Well, I'm count me in. My next tour in July. Okay, July for the book, The Forest of Vanishing Stars. I'm in.
All right, that's great.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed that. I had a great time moderating, and I hope that I got to everyone's questions. Just to remind you again, this is The Book of Lost Names. The Lost Book of Names by Kristin Harmel. And this is, it was a #1 instant New York Times bestseller. And the museum, we work a lot with our local bookstore, which is Books A Million, and that's in the mall here. So if you would like to get a signed copy of the book, Kristen has sent book plates to our local Sumter Books A Million. And if you would like a book, if you'd like to purchase a book with a signed book plate, that is the only location that you'll be able to get that in Sumter. So they also do, you can call in and place your order, and they do curbside pickup. So we, if you're local and you can, we would really like for you to try to order, from our local stores. And you can just go to Books A Million. We'll put a link up and just select Sumter as your store. And that's really all you have to do. And we hope that you guys join us again in a few weeks. We'll be having another virtual chat, and we can't wait to see you guys in the future. We've got some other events coming up that Annie has already told you guys about, and we just hope you have a great night. And I am going to go home, and I'm going to finish my book. All right, guys. Thank you so much. This is Amanda Cox with the Sumter County Museum, and I am signing off.